Welcome to the A4S Summit and Engaging the Board Executive Management Panel discussion. My name is Devinder Valeri. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian chapter of the Prince's Accounting for Sustainability project, A4S CFO Leadership Network. A4S was set up by His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, in 2004 to transform finance to deliver a sustainable future. Our vision is for sustainable business to be business as usual. When the Canadian chapter was formed in 2017, one of the first essential guides we endeavored to develop was engaging the boards and executive management. As most of our Canadian chapter members had or were experiencing the sustainability conversations with the boards, the topic was perfect for the guide. The purpose of our panel today is to learn about different experiences in engaging with your organizations and the impact from engagement. You will hear from the perspectives from a CFO and their experience, as well as an academic researcher who engages with organizations around the globe on how to embed sustainability within their organizations. We'll also hear from a board member who equips other board members on how to engage on the conversation of climate change. Before we start, I want to let you know that I'm joined with three panelists. I'm going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves, say hello, and let us know which organization they're with. So with that, I'm going to say hello to Phil, and we'll start with Phil, and then Stephanie, and then Julie.
Hey, thanks, Devinder. And hello, everyone. I'm Phil Witherington, the Global CFO of Manulife. And in addition to being the CFO, I also oversee the strategy and corporate development functions of Manulife, as well as our global property and casualty reinsurance business.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Birtles. I'm a prof at Simon Fraser University in the Beatty School of Business, and I'm also the founder of an organization called the Embedding Project.
And hi, I'm Julie Baddeley. I'm the chair of Chapter Zero, and I'll be telling you a bit about what that is later. But just very briefly, it's a network of non-executive directors who are taking the climate agenda into the boardroom.
So welcome, everyone, and thank you for being part of this panel. So let's start our conversation. Maybe I'll start with you, Stephanie. Tell us about the Embedding Project and why the project was initiated, and what are some activities and organizations that you are actually engaged with?
Thanks, Devinder. So the project is about a decade old now. So it started with a simple question, which is how do you embed sustainability across operations and decision making? And the beginning of that was a research project, which took a look at over 14,000 different articles, books, reports, to really try and understand what do we know about that and what remains to be known. And over the last decade, that has evolved into a partnership with dozens of companies around the world in a range of industries. And we bring these companies together through peer exchange and also through in-depth research working inside and with these companies to start to understand the needs, what's holding them back, and then to try and develop, pilot, and refine a set of resources and tools to help them do their part in advancing sustainability. And so the partner companies that we work with, banks like TD Bank and Nedbank, insurance companies. We work with companies in the extractive sector. So we've worked with Suncor Energy, Tech Resources, Rio Tinto. We work with Quadrille and just a number of other organizations around the world where we have been starting to really understand where they struggle, especially lately, really looking at how they create what we call an embedded strategy. And so if you think about this transition that we're in, the conversation that we're seeing from talking about moving from shareholder value to stakeholder value, and whether you call it the triple bottom line or whether you call it shared value, what we see is that for many companies still, that intersection point where those three different things intersect, where the environment, society, and the economy and their economic viability comes together, can often be kind of narrowly defined. It's always looking for these win-win opportunities. And it leads often to a set of well-intentioned initiatives, but not necessarily a fundamental shift in how you think about the business strategy. So what we've been encouraging companies to think about is systems value, and to think and acknowledge that every company operates within society and more broadly is limited by the available resources that we have in one planet. And to start to think about what does it mean to develop an embedded strategy that recognizes that your company is both dependent upon and needs to contribute to the resilience of those environmental and social systems.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm going to move on to maybe Phil a little bit. Phil, CFO of Manulife. It's a global organization. Maybe, tell us a little bit about Manulife and what sustainability means to your organization. And also, I want to know, why did you volunteer for this project? And I know you're a member of the CFO Leadership Network, but really, why did you join us?
Sure, thanks, Davina. And as you say, I'll start with a few comments about Manulife. So Manulife's one of the world's leading providers of insurance and wealth management solutions. We have 4 operating segments that comprise of a global wealth and asset management business and insurance businesses across 3 principal geographies of Asia, the United States, where we trade as John Hancock, and our home market of Canada. For Manulife, sustainability is not just a buzzword that's emerged in recent years. We have a clear mission: decisions made easier, lives made better, and our strategy to deliver that mission is built around stakeholders that extend well beyond our shareholders. These include our customers, employees, as well as the wider community. And our actions support this. A few examples from an environmental perspective. We've invested 14 billion Canadian dollars in renewable energy and energy efficiency. We manage 3.4 billion Canadian dollars of timberland, and this is timberland that's subject to third-party sustainability standards. And we've issued $1 billion of green bonds that avoid more than 150,000 tons of CO2 emissions per year. And it's not only about the environment. From a social perspective, we've been investing in human capital, for example, with the upskilling of our technology team. So upskilling initiatives, they're material investments to really help them build their skill set. And from a diversity perspective, in all respects, we believe in pursuing diversity, and it's a key priority for us. And a visible example is our board composition, which is 42% female, and our aim is to achieve gender parity. And you asked, this project, the Accounting for Sustainability Board and Executive Management Engagement Project, why is it so important? Well, I believe it's so important because the key to unlocking progress is alignment of stakeholders, in particular at the top of the house with the board and executive management. And so as a CFO, why am I really keen to be involved? I think it really comes down to the breadth and the enterprise-wide level of our responsibilities and the role that we have as CFOs in communication, both internally and externally. And I think a good example of this is that a CFO prompt, it could be a prompt to adopt TCFD disclosures. That can really capture the attention of executive peers and members of the board. And so I think as CFOs, we actually have a very strong position and strong ability to influence. That's really why I wanted to get involved.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to move on to Julie for a little bit. So Julie, Chapter Zero, tell us a little bit about the organization and how are you working with non-exec directors? And I guess you're trying to instill knowledge in them with respect to how to fight climate change. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about Chapter Zero.
Well, let me go back to the start just very briefly, because in early 2019, a group of us board members decided that we really had to get non-executive directors and chairs better informed on the challenge of climate change, because to take this topic into the boardroom, bearing in mind that most seats in board seats are occupied by independent directors, you really needed the whole board to recognize both the risks and opportunities and the strategy that was required. And we thought that this is something really worth doing. So we decided to set up a network for non-execs, as we call them in the UK, non-execs, focused specifically on the climate agenda. And we have a set of sister organizations around the world, because at the same time, the World Economic Forum had their climate governance initiative, and they launched principles for climate governance on boards. And so we became part of that movement. So as we sit here today, there's 20 organizations around the world that are forming groups of non-execs and chairs to take this forward. Chapter Zero in the UK is one of the biggest and the most mature of those. We have more than 1,000 members. More than half the FTSE 100 companies have got members as part of our community. We're free to join, and all our events are free. So we're very fortunate in having some philanthropic funding to sort of support our core team. And we have partners. We decided that we couldn't obviously do this alone. It's all about partnering and collaboration, fighting the climate battle. And so we partner with Cambridge University through the Hughes Hall Centre for Climate Change Engagement, with the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in the UK, Carbon Trust, and we have 6 really quite well-known board chairs supporting us in the UK as well. So it's a very active network. We've been amazed actually at how, in spite of COVID and everything being in lockdown and everything having to be remote, how the membership has still grown. And we provide our members with a huge range of events, toolkits, which I'll talk about a bit later, and other resources to try to just distill down the really relevant things for the board and for the non-executive directors of the board from this mass of information which is now out there about climate change. So I'm delighted to see the work that you're doing at A4S to help with that, because the relationship and engagement between the financial community within the organization and the CFO and the non-executives and the audit chair, for example, is absolutely key to us getting the momentum and accelerating the move towards net zero carbon, which is what the challenge is at the moment, I believe.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Julie. Phil, I mean, we've heard about why this project is important for Manulife. Perhaps you can tell us how you have worked with your peers, maybe the board, and the impact that the engagement has had on sustainability at Manulife.
Sure, and thanks to Devinder for the question. I think to some extent, our story is told by the governance elements of the disclosures in our TCFD, the TCFD component of our annual report. And these were new in 2019 and embedded in the risk management section in line with TCFD guidance. For many reasons, the executive leadership team and board recognized the importance of sustainability. And for me, from a personal perspective, my own involvement in A4S has been an important influence in what we've been doing. So our journey over the past couple of years, we've established an executive sustainability council. This is a 9-member subgroup of our executive leadership team that's supported by a cross-functional group of subject matter experts that we call the Sustainability Center of Expertise. We've also formed a climate change task force chaired by our Chief Risk Officer. And we formalized the board's oversight of ESG and sustainability topics within the responsibilities of the Corporate Governance and Nomination Committee of the board. And as a result of that, sustainability now is a feature of every single CGNC meeting. So it's really on the agenda every time the board meets. We've also developed a strategy that covers the environment, our people, our customers and investors, and our community. So this is a sustainability strategy that absolutely supports and is in line with our enterprise strategy. And as a result of all that, we have increased the amount of dialogue that we have with our stakeholders. We talk about sustainability at town halls, and we get more questions than ever before on sustainability topics, but we also talk about sustainability much more than in the past with investors, and that's both equity investors as well as our bondholders. And on the topic of bondholders, we've actually issued 2 green bonds with a Canadian dollar value of $1 billion. And the impact of those green bonds really enables the avoidance of more than 150 million tons of CO2 emissions per year. So in terms of progress and impact, we've enhanced our disclosures with the use of the Global Reporting Initiative as a framework for our sustainability report. And on the topic of climate change, we've aligned with the TCFD recommendations. And this is, as I said earlier, it's embedded in our financial disclosures rather than being a standalone report. And that's very much in line with the TCFD recommendations. And we're also being recognized for our ESG progress. Just in 2020, the MSCI has upgraded Manulife from A to AA. And Sustainalytics has reduced our risk profile from medium ESG risk to low ESG risk. And we've also been included in the Bloomberg Equality Index. So I think that speaks to the power of really focusing on governance and leadership on topics of sustainability. We can really have an impact. And as we look to the future, I think we're really looking to apply much of the work that we've done to help inform target setting and further action. So really stay tuned on that one.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Phil, and great to see the governance really working its way through Manulife. Stephanie, recognizing just what Phil just said as well, I know you work with a lot of large organizations, like you indicated. You mentioned Suncor. What have you found to be most successful when working with these organizations? So
I think Phil outlines the journey well. So I think there are a number of pieces along the way. A big piece of it really is that developing an embedded strategy. So one of the things we've released recently is what we call our embedded strategies guide. It helps companies think about what their strategy is to be contributing to the transition. And so that really means understanding your environmental and social context. So taking the time to really understand the environmental and social issues and the health and resilience of the systems that you're operating in. And then thinking about how do you develop a strategy internally that's in alignment with doing your part to support the health of those systems. And so part of that is you actually have to identify emerging risks. And we find often in business that risks sort of bubble up and risks become risks only after the business has experienced them and started to develop some patterns associated with that. And as Phil kind of indicated, actually, we're seeing risks jump from one topic to another, from one sector to another. We're seeing that risk profile shift really rapidly. And so that's why we developed a tool that we call the prioritization radar, that helps companies do a really thorough job of reflecting on climate, biodiversity, water, community resilience, worker well-being, governance and ethics, and a number of other topics, where we've really laid out in detail what those sub-issues might be. And then having them start to think about, so number one, how does that issue impact your core strategy going forward? And to what extent does that have strategic relevance on the direction that you're going to need to go? What are your unmitigated direct impacts? What are the unmitigated impacts that are sitting in your value chain? But also, where is your potential for positive influence in the system? So where are you uniquely positioned, where you have a set of resources or understanding or an ability to convene or influence in order to be able to actually shift the system? And then, so along the way, you're going to need to develop goals. We've created a credible goals database in partnership with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development that we'll be maintaining. We're really transparent on the criteria that we use, and it's not all goals in the world, but we do review We've reviewed over 10,000 goals in order to identify the best ones in each sector and under each topic. We also have done a huge review. Again, I think we're up to about 14,000 different position statements to look and see. So we've spoken a lot with, especially we find, Julie, that it's non-executive directors have a tendency to really want the company to articulate a position on key issues. And we've heard from chairs, board chairs, and CEOs really around the world that it was that process that really got them thinking and that really got them to actually engage with the issue. But we also heard that companies often don't know what a good position statement looks like or what it should contain. So we reviewed thousands of them, and we created both a structure and a checklist for how to do that. And then we have our position statement database where you can look at leading statements to try and benchmark your statement against other statements. And again, we keep that up to date. And already, for instance, we've included statements related to pandemics, related to COVID, related to worker treatment and worker security. And of course, there are tons and tons of climate statements in there as well. And then the work that we're doing right now is actually really thinking about the capital allocation model. And so we've been doing a lot of interviews with companies on how they're starting to shift their core capital allocation decision-making, how they're bringing life cycle thinking into their procurement decision-making. And then the last piece of it is that it's also about supporting people who want to be change agents from whatever seat in the organization that they occupy. And so we have guidebooks on how to be an effective change agent. We have guidebooks that are based on our hundreds of interviews that we've done with CEOs about what has influenced their thinking. And we also have been doing a tremendous amount of work. A number of my PhD students over the years have looked at storytelling in the organization and narrative infrastructure, and really understanding how the stories that you tell so crucially shape the decisions that get made in organizations, and how to really consciously understand what is that sort of infrastructure of stories that you rely upon as an organization, and then how do you start to shift those over time. So all of those resources are freely available because we're funded in part through our partner contributions, but also through the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And they have a really strong mandate for knowledge mobilization. So I just hope anyone, you're welcome to go to embeddingproject.org and take a look at those resources.
That's very powerful. Thanks, Stephanie. And I know our guide is peppered with the tools that you're talking about. And for me personally, the storytelling is extremely powerful, because once you see how others have done it, you can definitely emulate it and figure out what some of the challenges are. So I guess maybe with that, Julie, you also talked a little bit about tools that Chapter Zero has developed. And I think for those listening to the session, maybe you can walk us through how a board of directors could engage with some of this material.
Certainly, I can do that. And I have to say, I feel incredibly enthused listening to Steph, because that set of things that you've been doing just sound absolutely brilliant. And they chime so much with what I see as being the need for boards to sort of engage with this topic. And my background for many years was as what they called a change management consultant. And so the whole thing about storytelling and bringing this to life is hugely important. And also, I think balancing risk and reward, because we talk a lot about risk, but there's huge opportunity in this agenda as well. And part of our mission now for 2021, partly because the UK will be hosting COP26, is to get some optimism into the stories, because it's all been so grim. And I think the evidence now suggests that we can actually tackle this problem. We can do it if business really gets behind it. So our message is all about that. So that's a slight digression from your question, but just to come back to your question then, Steph also used the term, this is a journey, and we very much see it as that for the directors as well. We launched something back in a few months ago called the Directors Climate Journey, which is a way of curating really the information that's available to board members, so that they, regardless of where they are on the sort of knowledge scale, they can sort of come into the topic, even if they have had very, very little conversation about climate. They can come into the topic at that point, or they can engage with it at a more experienced level. I mean, what we've found is, board agendas are just so crowded. We all know this, and there's so little time to devote to this topic. And most board members, even the executive, but certainly the independent board members, they've never really been educated on this topic in the past. It's not been part of, in my case, 40 years of business. I mean, I've been on boards for 25 years now, and we've never really had these conversations until very, very recently. So there's a lot to engage with, and there's certainly no shame in not having deep knowledge at this point. So in our tool sets, and these are all, as Steph said, they're all free to use for anybody. They can be downloaded off the website, and I think will be entirely complementary to what you're producing at A4S, because ours are sort of board flavor, but yours are have got that finance spin to them. So we have a board readiness check, which allows directors to see where they think their companies want to get to on this whole climate challenge and where they are today. There's an overview of the whole issue, and a short outline to different reporting frameworks, TCFD obviously being the primary one, and other matters to do with climate change that they may not be aware of. But the readiness check is sort of online, and you can do it in real time. And the idea is that you don't just do it yourself, but you get the whole board to do it. You can compare notes. We've got a change management toolkit that talks about how you set net zero strategies and where to go for experience on that. We have a primer on physical risk. We also work with A4S, in fact, on the Goal 13 project, which is when it's fully up and running, will be an online database of examples, because I think a lot of board members really want to see examples of what other companies are doing. And so we have a huge amount going on in terms of tools, and a very wide range of events. And I won't go into all of those, but to sort of illustrate the sorts of topics, I mean, we're very engaged with supply chain, because doing the end-to-end work on the supply chain for companies is absolutely key to delivering on this. We very much focus on getting different people from within the organization involved together in coming up with their thinking about strategy and risk and opportunity, because this can't be siloed. It affects the whole business. It needs to be collaborative, which is we think very, very important. And we get a lot of peer discussions going between board committee members about what does this mean for remuneration, what's it mean for the audit committee and risk, or audit and risk committee, what does it mean for the sustainability committee. So we're very much about conversation and discussion, and trying to really get underneath what this means for your company.
Thank you so very much, Julie. And I think that transition when Stephanie was speaking, and to me, I always get passionate about storytelling as well. So thank you for linking that in as well. I wanted to maybe take a little bit of time and talk about the finance teams and the CFOs. And I thought perhaps maybe you can offer some tips, take some time and let those readers, those listeners that are listening to us, maybe engage and figure out what you would think of as top tips for them to consider as they're going through this journey. Maybe we can start with Stephanie.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we've seen is you have to deliberately make space for this conversation within the capital planning process. And I think what we've also seen as companies start to move on that journey of doing that is that you have to push it back as far possible as you can into the design process. And so whether that's, in Phil's case, designing products and services, related to insurance, or whether that's in the design of or even siting of a new mine, or in the real estate sector, thinking about which property you're going to purchase as part of your portfolio and how you would think about developing that property. The key really is to try and get this understanding of the environmental and social systems as part of those key forces that you think about. So, you know, many decision makers are still influenced by Michael Porter's 5 forces framework. And you know, 40 years ago, he suggested that companies can't just make decisions on their own. They need to understand the context of the industry that they're working in. And really, this is a set of additional forces. So yes, you need to understand the context of the industry that you're working in. You also need to understand the social context that you're working in. And you need to understand the environmental context that you're working in and the constraints that those are both going to place on the growth of your business going forwards. And you know, the other one is this potential for disruptive technology that obviously has a huge influence on all of us going forwards. So I think, to me, that's the biggest thing, is that how can you help your finance teams to develop that understanding? And the great answer is, in most cases, there are people within your business that are sitting within the chief sustainability office, that are sitting within procurement, that are sitting in a number of different parts of the business that actually have that outward facing view of the organization and can actually really help you to understand what those emerging risks and opportunities may be and how they may have an influence on the financial decisions that you need to make.
Excellent. Maybe I'll pass it on to Phil. Phil, what do you think?
Sure, thanks, Devinder. And if I may, I will offer 2 top tips for CFOs. I think the first is talk about sustainability. People often expect the CFO to be financially obsessed. You know, what happened to earnings this quarter, how strong the balance sheet is. So when we talk about sustainability, it really gets noticed. And a little example, last September, I was speaking at a sustainability conference in New York, and our US business is in Boston. So I decided to jump on a train. I jumped on the train, I think it was about 2.5 hours to Boston from New York. And I spent half a day with our US team, that part of John Hancock, our business in the US. And the fact that, or I suppose the reason for me being in the US was a great point of interest for our team. And that prompted the conversation. And in fact, ever since we've had that conversation about sustainability, every time I talk to them, it gets weaved back into the conversation. So don't hold back and really talk about sustainability. The second top tip that I will offer is, don't be shy to demonstrate why finance should have a prominent role at the table. I think we have, as CFOs and accountants, finance professionals, we have an understanding of the reporting frameworks. We can interpret TCFD and its requirements in a very straightforward manner, and the interaction of those frameworks with other parts of our external disclosures. I also think that CFOs bring credibility to the conversation, both internally and externally. And finally, our ability to get things done, whether it's embedding KPIs that in turn prompt actions, or translating the aspirations of an organization into tangible targets, action planning, and delivery. I think we can really help to get things done. So don't hold back and don't be too humble. Accountants are great.
I always say accountants can change the world. Maybe I'll go to Julie. Julie, please give us some tips for our finance teams.
Well, we've had some very good tips already, I have to say, from someone who really knows, in Phil's case, what it's all about. I suppose my first tip, and I would say this, wouldn't I, but get your independent board members and your chair to join Chapter Zero if they're a UK company, or if not, get in touch with us and we can tell you where your nearest chapter is. And I say that, you know, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but it is a serious point, because there is absolutely no way that a finance team can educate board members on a topic that's as broad as this. There just isn't the airtime to do it, and there's so much to tell them around investor perceptions, around, you know, all the different frameworks. There's just a lot there that non-execs need to get on top of, and so I think that we can do some of that heavy lifting for the CFOs, because, you know, we can offer that content to people. A couple of other things, I suppose. I completely agree with Phil about this. I would add one thing, which is, if you get a chance, talk one-to-one with your board members, and not just in the boardroom, because I think you'll find that if you do that, and if you ask questions first rather than telling them answers, you will find that different board members are at a very different point in their journey and in their level of understanding. And that will help you then engage with them, so that when you then have a presentation in the boardroom, they are already in the right place to discuss that. So my suggestion would be it doesn't take a huge, you know, how many are there? 6, 8 probably maximum board members. Set up an hour with each one and say, I'd really like to understand where you're coming from on this topic. Get them to talk first and then engage, because non-executives don't get the privilege of that sort of content all the time. We only talk to our CFO when they're in the boardroom, unless we're the audit chair. So I think that would be very helpful. And final tip, which is going to sound like a really boring tip, but don't underestimate the power of TCFD when it comes to the board. You know, to do a proper job, and I say that advisedly, to do a proper job on TCFD, you've got to look at scenarios. You've got to really understand all aspects of the value chain. You know, this is not just she says, a sort of reporting thing. This is fundamentally getting into the skin of the business. And I don't know what the situation is in Canada, but certainly in the UK, as of a couple of weeks ago, TCFD is definitely going to be mandatory. So if you want a way to get the attention of your board members, absolutely get them to recognize they're going to be reporting against TCFD, and they probably haven't begun to think about the data required for that to do it properly, the scenarios that you need to run, the banking regulatory framework that's going to be coming into place as well, which will also be mandatory. So there's a lot of external levers, in Michael Porter's terms, that we can use to sort of get the attention, rather than having to sort of try to scratch your way onto the agenda.
Great tidbits, and I think great insight that everybody has offered. And I think I would agree with you that the change is actually coming at us rather at an accelerated pace. And you're right, it is TCFD is mandatory in the UK and Canada, not yet. But you know what, things are moving really quickly, and you never know. And even with the A4S Foundation's consultation that's out there, looking for International Sustainability Board, I think the light is being shone in the direction that I think we all know where it's going. So it's just a matter of time. So this has been a great discussion. And I think I want to thank you for sharing your viewpoints and offering your insights. You know, the Canadian chapter of the A4S Leadership Network is run in partnership with CPA Canada, and the focus on the finance is extremely important. This guide on engaging the board and executive management is something is trying to get that tone of the top to start paying attention to what needs to be done when we talk about sustainability, and those at the realm of oversight need to be basically woken up on this. So I really appreciate the work, Julie and Stephanie, that you guys are doing on this, and Phil, the leadership that Manulife has shown has been amazing. So this guide, it's you know, run by the Canadian chapter as one of our first essential guides, but it's very much a global project. It's got very much the global perspectives with respect to what the boards and senior management need to be aware of. For this guide, there were other, I guess, leaders as well as part of the Canadian chapter. Along with Manulife, we had Brookfield Asset Management, We had Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, OMERS was part of this, TELUS. We also had WaterCare from Europe that offered some insights. So all of these organizations offered some, we call them worked examples on how they've actually engaged the boards. The guide sets out, I guess, a typical process for engaging the board executive management. You have given great tidbits on this, and some of these are actually part of the guide. We talk about step 1, understand, research what sustainability means for the organization. Step 2, we talk about having a plan of action, leverage the role of finance to get that buy-in and the support from the executives. Step 3, we talk about engage, like present the case for sustainability to the board and even utilize the board's activities, get on their agenda. And step 4, we talk about sustain and improve. And again, this is about continuous improvement, continue to engage the board and improve the information, improve the processes on a continuous basis. We talk about board activities, there's this opportunity to get on that board agenda. Boards have their business strategy and their planning, get into that decision-making process. The board, Stephanie, you talk about governance and risk management. That's a perfect spot. Corporate development and investment. Again, there's an area to get into sustainability. And then obviously financial reporting and internal controls. So recognizing that, different organizations have different experiences, and we learned that here today. The guide really provides a bit of a nuanced perspective of the order of actions that you could consider. And it recognizes that one shoe doesn't fit all. I mean, it's not necessarily linear. There are some ebbs and flows on how you can actually approach this, but at the end of the day, you do want to get onto that board's agenda. You do want to get onto their preview of what they need to do when we talk about sustainability and even climate change. But the guide's really to help those that, even if they're in different parts of the journey of sustainability, from beginners to perhaps even, but to give them a bit of a lens, a bit of a viewpoint of what they should consider. So with that, I want to thank everybody. Those that are listening, I would encourage you to visit our websites, visit the A4S Knowledge Hub. Also, if you want to be on our newsletter, please let us know. We'll engage with you. But with that, I'm going to sign off. And then again, personally, thank you, Julie. Thank you, Stephanie and Phil, for being part of this. And we'll sign off. Thank you.